Before the end of the month, the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to rule on the future of affirmative action at America's colleges and universities. The divisive cases will be decided in part by two senior justices who say that they've benefited from the policy, but who now sharply disagree on whether it should continue. In tonight's Prime Focus, our Devin Dwyer looks at the divide and how the court's most senior conservative member and also its most liberal member each arrived at such different views.
The Supreme Court's most senior conservative and most senior liberal both rose from humble beginnings. Clarence Thomas grew up poor in still segregated rural Georgia before getting accepted to Yale Law School in 1971.
The effort on the part of Yale during my years there was to reach out and open its doors to minorities whom it felt were qualified.
Just 5 years later, Sonia Sotomayor tread a similar path to Yale from the Bronx.
One of the poorest neighborhoods in the United States when I was growing up. And yet none of those challenges has stopped me reaching where I have. And I attributed all of it to my education.
The court's only Latina and its only black man both credit affirmative action with helping them access elite educations. Yet both are now starkly opposed on whether the practice should continue.
Both had radicalizing experiences with racism and discrimination.
Leah Wright-Rigueur is a historian who specializes in race, politics, and civil rights.
If it's true that those radicalizing experiences can push someone to the left, then it's also true that those radicalized experiences can push someone to the right.
At some point, we're going to be fatigued with everybody being a victim.
Without affirmative action, I couldn't even have participated in the race of a good education.
So as Clarence Thomas grows up, working class poor black community in the South, we also know from Justice Sotomayor that her experience with racism, with inequality, with discrimination in a Northeast that was supposed to be liberated, enlightened, but perhaps was not, is deeply influential in how she understands these things.
Sotomayor has called the use of race in college admissions an extension of the civil rights movement of the 1960s.
Schools were saying, we're not diverse. We're not giving opportunity to people from different backgrounds. That's important for the society.
For more than 40 years, the Supreme Court has shared that view, endorsing the idea that diversity benefits all students and that schools can consider race in deciding which students to accept. But now the court's new conservative majority appears ready to change course.
By and large, what they're going to say is that race itself cannot be a determinative factor in one's admission because a benefit to one race, quote unquote, is a detriment to another.
Once again, it's the elites. I mean, they're telling us what we need.
Thomas has had his sights set on ending affirmative action for years, but he once seemed to support the necessity of race-conscious programs.
I've supported affirmative action programs. Whether or not I agree with all of them, I think is a matter of record. But the fact that I don't agree with all does not mean that I'm not a supporter of the underlying effort.
As the only black student in his boarding school seminary class, Thomas was later encouraged to apply to Holy Cross College in 1968 and given a scholarship for racial minorities.
I don't think anyone who was a beneficiary of that, of those programs or that action should apologize for it.
Vincent Rougeau is president of Holy Cross.
I have the deepest respect for his accomplishments and for his work at Holy Cross in terms of fighting for racial justice here.
Thomas went on to Yale Law School, which admitted him at the same time it was openly recruiting more minority students. But years later, in stern dissents, Thomas would call affirmative action a faddish theory that stigmatized him.
One of the things that would happen when I was nominated to the court that I couldn't possibly be as good as the white Yale graduates, because I obviously went to Yale because of the color of my skin.
He's saying that affirmative action hurt him overall, and that as the only black member of the court, he's an important and unique voice on that front.
Sotomayor takes a different approach.
The inequalities in society build that barrier so high that unless you do something to either knock it down a little bit or help that person up over it, they're never going to have a chance.
The philosophical contrast is on display in a pair of landmark cases that now pit Harvard and the University of North Carolina, which consider race in admissions, against a group of Asian American student challengers, led by conservative legal activist Edward Bloom.
A student's race or ethnicity should not be used to help him or harm him in his chances of gaining admission to a competitive college.
The schools say alternatives to affirmative action, such as a focus on socioeconomic status, simply aren't as effective, and that if the court strikes down the practice, it will mean fewer minorities on campuses nationwide.
To be in a situation where we're concerned about moving backward is really troubling to us.
You can't use affirmative action forever. You got to find other ways to improve the selection process. But we haven't found those ways just yet.
I was very fortunate to grow up around people who saw beyond their circumstances and who refused to be limited by those circumstances or to wallow in the sort of victim status of their circumstances.
2 justices and a shared belief in equality and the power of education, now deeply divided on the law and the future of affirmative action in America.
So much at stake. We are joined now by Devin Dwyer, who covers the court for us. And Devin, the conservative supermajority is widely expected to roll back the use of race in college admissions when it decides those cases this month. Explain what that will mean practically and how quickly the admissions process could change.
Well, ending affirmative action in higher education, Lindsay, would change the admissions process for all students everywhere. Nationwide, check boxes for race and ethnicity could come off those application forms. Schools, especially the most selective ones, would be forbidden from giving a plus point, if you will, to historically disadvantaged minority students. And those strategies for building diverse campus environments that are so critical, the schools say, to enriching learning, those would all have to be rethought, at least in the short term. Experts say that will mean, if they end affirmative action, fewer Black and Latinx students on campuses nationwide. We've seen that already in the data from the 9 states that have discontinued the use of race in public university admissions. So whatever the court does, it will likely impact incoming high school seniors this year who are applying for college this fall to start in 2024, Lindsay.
All right, we will be paying attention to that. Devin Dwyer in Washington for us. Thanks so much as always, Devin.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.